Ethan had always believed in trust. It was the bedrock of his marriage, a silent understanding that didn't require second-guessing. Lauren had never given him a reason to doubt her, until recently. It started with a passing comment over dinner one Friday night. "You know, I've been thinking, I want to learn more about craft beer," Lauren had said, twirling her fork against her plate. "There's a workshop downtown every weekend, beginners brewing classes. It sounds fun, don't you think?" Ethan had raised an eyebrow, pleasantly surprised. Lauren wasn't much of a beer drinker, preferring crisp white wines or the occasional cocktail. He hadn't noticed any particular enthusiasm for hops and barley before, but people picked up new hobbies all the time. "That's great," he had said, genuinely supportive. "Maybe you can teach me a thing or two when you get the hang of it." Lauren had laughed, a sound so natural it put him at ease. "I'll probably mess it up at first, but yeah, I'll bring home something for you to try." But she never did. Weeks passed, and every Saturday morning she'd leave early, dressed casually but with an extra touch of effort, hair done, a bit more makeup than usual. She carried a small leather-bound notebook and a reusable tote, as if she truly intended to take notes and bring back ingredients, except she never brought back anything. No samples, no odd-smelling bottles filled with experimental brews, no amusing stories about measured yeast or foam overflowing. Instead, when Ethan asked, she spoke in vague generalities. "It's really interesting," she'd say, giving a non-committal shrug. "A lot of chemistry involved." "You'd probably love it." She dodged specifics. "Who else goes?" Ethan had asked one night, feigning casual curiosity. "Oh, just a mix of people," she'd replied too quickly. "Some regulars, some newbies. The instructor is great, really knows his stuff." That was the first time Ethan felt it. A barely perceptible shift in the air between them, like a wisp of something sour floating through an otherwise pleasant conversation. It wasn't much, just a feeling. But feelings had weight, and over the years Ethan had learned to trust his instincts. So one Saturday evening, while Lauren was still out, he did something he never thought he'd have to do. He pulled up the website for the brewing workshop. A simple search, a harmless, rational act of curiosity, except her name wasn't there. Not on the class roster. Not on the list of attendees for any past or future sessions. No, that's when the first crack in her story appeared. A small hairline fracture in the glass of his trust, and he had a sinking feeling that soon it was going to shatter. Ethan sat in his home office, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face in the dimly lit room. His pulse was steady, but his mind raced. He stared at the brewing workshop's website, refreshing the page as if Lauren's name might suddenly appear where it hadn't been before. But it didn't. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she had used a different name for registration, or maybe the website hadn't been updated. But deep down, he already knew the truth. This wasn't an oversight. This was deception. He clicked over to the brewery's event page on social media, scanning through recent posts. Photos from the latest workshops were neatly arranged in an album. Enthusiastic groups of beer lovers stood gathered around steel vats, their faces eager as they listened to the instructor explain the process. Ethan clicked through each one carefully, his eyes searching for Lauren's face. She wasn't in any of them. Still, a part of him wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. He wasn't the kind of man to jump to conclusions without proof. So he decided to dig deeper. He pulled out his phone and opened their shared location history. It was something they had set up years ago for safety reasons. If either of them got stranded somewhere, the other could track them down. He rarely checked it. He had never needed to. His stomach tightened as the map loaded. Lauren wasn't at the address of the brewing workshop. She hadn't been there any of the previous Saturdays either. Her location history told a different story. Instead of spending her weekends learning the art of craft beer, she had been at a different place entirely, a trendy little brewery on the other side of town, a place neither of them had ever been to before. Ethan clicked on the brewery's website. It was a sleek, modern establishment, its homepage showcasing images of beautifully arranged flights of beer, smiling patrons, and a polished bar lined with handcrafted taps. The owner's face stood out immediately. A man in his early 40s, tall, with neatly styled dark hair and a confident smirk. His bio described him as the mastermind behind the establishment, a man passionate about craft beer, blending flavors, and creating unforgettable experiences. His name was Mark. Ethan didn't know him, but he suddenly felt like he did. The realization hit him like a slow-moving train. It wasn't just that Lauren had lied. It was who she had been lying about. For a moment, Ethan just sat there, staring at the screen. A dull ache pressed against his chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, something heavier, betrayal. He needed to see it with his own eyes. That evening, when Lauren kissed him on the cheek and left with the same familiar "see you later," Ethan didn't just stay home. He waited 10 minutes, then grabbed his keys and followed. He drove carefully, keeping a few cars behind her, his hands steady on the wheel even as his heart pounded. She took the familiar turn toward downtown, but instead of pulling into the industrial building where the brewing workshops were held, she drove straight to the brewery. Ethan parked across the street and watched as she stepped out of her car. She smoothed down her blouse, ran a hand through her hair, and took a deep breath before walking inside. There was nothing hesitant in her movements. No nervous glances, no sign of guilt or hesitation. She had done this before. Ethan's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. From the outside, the brewery looked warm and inviting. String lights hung across the outdoor patio, where couples and groups of friends sat with pints of golden liquid. Laughter and conversation hummed in the air. And there she was. Through the large glass window, Ethan spotted her instantly. Lauren was standing at the bar, her back straight, shoulders relaxed. Across from her stood Mark, pouring a drink with practiced ease. She leaned in slightly as he spoke, her lips curving into a smile, one Ethan hadn't seen in months. And then, as if to erase any lingering doubt, she lifted her glass and clinked it against his. A toast. A quiet, intimate celebration of something Ethan wasn't a part of. His jaw tightened and something inside him shifted. Lauren thought she had built a perfect, airtight alibi. She thought her story was smooth, believable, unbreakable. But she had underestimated him. Because now Ethan wasn't just suspicious. He was certain, and soon Lauren was going to realize that the truth had a way of spilling over. Just like the lies she thought she had under control, Ethan wasn't a man prone to impulsive decisions. He had always been steady, rational, the kind of person who took his time to analyze a situation before making a move. But as he sat in his car outside the brewery, watching his wife laugh and toast with another man, he felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. A slow, simmering burn of anger. Lauren wasn't just here to learn about beer. She wasn't here for the experience, the knowledge, or the passion of the craft. She was here for Mark, for whatever they had been building in secret while Ethan sat at home, believing in her lies. He could have driven away. He could have let the moment settle, gathered himself, and confronted her later in the safety of their home. That would have been the logical thing to do. But Ethan had spent weeks drowning in confusion, questioning his own instincts, second-guessing every sign he had ignored. Now, with the truth laid out before him, he wasn't going to waste another second pretending. He stepped out of his car, crossed the street, and walked straight into the brewery. The warm scent of hops and malt filled the air, mixing with the sound of clinking glasses and soft conversation. The place was lively, buzzing with people enjoying their evening, unaware that the moment was about to turn. Lauren didn't see him at first. She was too focused on Mark, her attention drawn to the way he poured her another drink, his hand resting just a little too familiarly on the bar beside hers. She leaned toward him, her body language open, inviting. Ethan's stomach twisted. He didn't hesitate. He walked through the crowd, his footsteps steady until he was standing just a few feet away. It wasn't until Mark glanced up, mid-sentence, that Lauren finally turned, and the second she met Ethan's gaze, her entire expression shifted. For a brief moment there was a flicker of something in her eyes, panic, surprise, maybe even guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by something colder. She straightened, putting on a composed face, as if she could pretend this was nothing. "Ethan," she said, her voice carefully even, "what are you doing here?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, watching the way she gripped the stem of her glass just a little too tightly. how Mark tensed beside her, suddenly far less comfortable. "What am I doing here?" Ethan repeated, his voice low, controlled. "I could ask you the same thing, Lauren." Lauren exhaled slowly, placing her drink down. "I told you. I've been coming to these brewing workshops." "No, you haven't." Ethan cut her off before she could build another lie. He pulled his phone from his pocket and turned the screen toward her, displaying the location history he had checked earlier. "You've never been at those workshops, Lauren. Not once." A heavy silence settled between them. Mark cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Look, man, maybe we should—" Ethan turned to him sharply. "You don't speak. Not yet." His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it, one that made Mark close his mouth. Lauren crossed her arms, her defense walls going up. "I don't know what you think you found, but this isn't what it looks like." Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "It never is it?" He gestured around them to the cozy atmosphere, the drinks in their hands, the ease in their body language. "So tell me, Lauren, what exactly am I looking at?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ethan saw everything he needed to know. She was searching for a way out, a way to explain this away, to twist the truth just enough to make herself the victim. Mark, however, wasn't as smooth. He shifted again, his fingers tapping against the bar. "Look, Ethan, there's no need for this to get ugly. Let's all just be adults about this." Ethan's gaze snapped to him. "Adults?" He let the word hang between them. "You mean like my wife pretending she was somewhere else while she was here with you? Or like you thinking you could sleep with another man's wife without consequences?" Mark had the decency to look uncomfortable, but Lauren wasn't ready to back down yet. "Ethan, lower your voice," she hissed. "You're making a scene." Ethan took a step closer, his voice dropping instead of rising. "A scene? You think I care about a scene, Lauren? I care about the fact that you lied to me. Repeatedly. That every single time I asked you about these so-called workshops, you fed me a line and expected me to swallow it." Her lips parted, but Ethan wasn't finished. "You thought I wouldn't check, that I'd be too trusting to question it. And you know what? That's on me, because I did trust you. I trusted you so much that I ignored the inconsistencies, the weird little gaps in your stories, the way you never once brought home a single thing from these brewing lessons." Lauren's mask slipped for just a second, and Ethan saw it. The guilt, the realization that she had been caught without an escape route. Mark took a half step back. "Listen, man." Ethan turned on him. "You don't get to talk, Mark. You've already done enough." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You thought this would stay hidden, didn't you? That it would stay neat and tidy, just a little fun on the side. But here's the thing. Secrets have a way of spilling over, and right now Lauren's little cover story is making a mess all over this bar." Lauren reached out as if to touch his arm, but Ethan pulled back before she could. "We'll talk at home," she tried, but Ethan shook his head. "No, we won't." He took one last look at her, at the woman he had trusted, at the man who had stood beside her with a smug arrogance that was rapidly fading. Then he turned and walked away. As he stepped outside, the night air felt sharp against his skin, but his mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. Lauren had thought her lies were airtight, that her secret meetings were untouchable, but the truth had a way of spilling out, and Ethan wasn't going to clean up the mess. Ethan walked out of the brewery without looking back. He could still hear the muffled hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the faint echoes of laughter from inside. But none of it mattered anymore. His mind was sharp, his body steady, but beneath the surface a storm was brewing. He had never imagined that his marriage would come to this. For years he had been a supportive husband, the kind who encouraged his wife's interests, trusted her implicitly, and never felt the need to check up on her. But tonight that trust had shattered, like a glass dropped onto concrete. The weight of betrayal pressed against his chest, but he refused to let it consume him. He got into his car and sat in silence for a long moment. His phone vibrated on the passenger seat, Lauren's name flashing on the screen. He ignored it. A second call came in, then a third. He didn't pick up. She had spent weeks, maybe even months, fabricating an entire story, lying to his face without hesitation. Now she wanted to talk, to explain, to do damage control. Ethan wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. Instead, he started his car and drove home. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed something strange. The house, which had always felt warm and inviting, now seemed foreign. The home they had built together, the space where they had laughed, argued, and shared years of memories, was now just a structure of walls and a roof. It no longer felt like his sanctuary. Inside, everything was exactly as he had left it. The kitchen counter still had the coffee mugs from their morning routine, her jacket was draped over the chair by the door, and their wedding photo stood proudly on the mantel. The sight of it made his stomach turn. He walked over, picked up the photo, and studied it. Lauren's smile was bright, her eyes full of warmth. His arm was wrapped around her, both of them looking like a couple with a lifetime ahead of them. But now, that image felt like a lie. Ethan placed the frame face down. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Lauren. "Ethan, please, let's talk." Talk? About what? About how she had sat across from him for weeks, smiling through her lies? About how she had looked him in the eyes and assured him she was just learning a new hobby while she was really toasting drinks with another man? Ethan wasn't one for dramatic outbursts. He wasn't going to throw things or scream, but he also wasn't going to be played for a fool any longer. His mind was already working through the next steps. He wasn't the type to keep things quiet, to sweep problems under the rug. Lauren had lied to him so effortlessly, so thoroughly, that it made him wonder, had she done this before? Had there been other lies, other betrayals? He wasn't going to sit in the dark and wonder. Lauren's car pulled into the driveway 15 minutes later. Ethan heard the front door unlock, the soft shuffle of her footsteps as she entered hesitantly. She paused in the doorway, as if bracing herself. "Ethan," she said softly. He didn't turn right away. He could hear the unsteadiness in her voice, the way she was already calculating how to navigate this situation. "Don't," he said, his voice calm but firm. She hesitated. Can we sit down? Can we talk?" He turned then, meeting her gaze. "Talk? Now you want to talk?" His tone wasn't raised, but there was something in it that made her flinch. "You had plenty of chances to talk before, Lauren. Every time I asked about those workshops. Every time I supported you. Every time I believed in you." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she looked unsure of herself. "It wasn't," she started, but Ethan cut her off. "Don't tell me it wasn't what it looked like. I was standing right there, Lauren. I saw you. I saw the way you looked at him." She swallowed hard, taking a cautious step forward. "Ethan, I never meant to hurt you." He let out a hollow laugh. "But you did. And the worst part, you didn't even hesitate. You lied so easily. Did you ever feel guilty, even once?" She rubbed her arms, as if trying to comfort herself. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Ethan said, "because right now there's nothing you can say that will make this better." Lauren exhaled, shaking her head. "It wasn't serious. It was just a distraction." Ethan clenched his jaw. "A distraction? That's what you call it?" He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "You know what? It doesn't even matter. Because I'm done." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm done playing the part of the trusting husband who ignores the signs. I'm done letting you take my kindness for granted. You made your choices, Lauren, and now you'll deal with the consequences." She paled. "Ethan, please, don't do this. Don't let one mistake ruin everything we've built." "Own mistake?" He shook his head. "Lauren, this wasn't a mistake. It was a series of decisions. Every time you walked into that brewery, every time you looked me in the face and lied, those were choices." Tears welled in her eyes. But Ethan had no sympathy left to give. "I'm telling our friends and family the truth," he continued. "No more lies, no more stories about your so-called brewing workshops. You're going to own this." She took a shaky breath. "You don't have to do that." "Oh, but I do," he said, his voice unwavering. "Because I won't let you twist this into something it's not. I won't let you rewrite history to make yourself the victim." Lauren's face crumpled, but Ethan didn't waver. He wasn't cruel by nature, but he also wasn't a fool. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," he said, "and tomorrow We're figuring out how to divide everything, but make no mistake, Lauren, this marriage is over." She let out a small, broken sound, but Ethan simply turned away. He didn't need to hear her excuses. He had finally seen her for who she really was, and there was no going back. Ethan had always thought the worst part of betrayal would be the moment of discovery, the gut-wrenching realization that the person you trusted most had lied. But he was wrong. The worst part came afterward, in the quiet spaces where the echoes of broken trust lingered. Lauren had moved out within the week. There was no tearful goodbye, no desperate attempt to salvage what was already beyond saving. She packed her things in careful silence, avoiding Ethan's gaze as she filled her suitcases. He had expected more resistance, more pleading, but perhaps she already knew it was pointless. The house, once filled with the small comforts of their shared life, felt foreign without her presence. Her favorite coffee mug was gone from the kitchen shelf. The scent of her perfume no longer clung to the air, and the indentation of her side of the bed had vanished. Ethan found himself staring at empty spaces, wondering how something that had felt permanent could unravel so quickly, but he didn't allow himself to dwell. The night after she left, Ethan made good on his promise. He sat down at his desk, composed a single, measured message, and sent it out to their friends and family. "Lauren and I are no longer together. She was unfaithful. I won't entertain speculation or excuses. I simply want the truth to be known." It was brief, direct, no embellishments, no anger, just the cold, undeniable reality. Responses flooded in. Some were shocked, others expressed sympathy, a few admitted they had suspected something but hadn't known how to say it. His closest friends reached out immediately, offering support, drinks, distractions, anything to keep his mind from dwelling on the wreckage. Ethan appreciated their concern, but he didn't need distractions. He needed closure. Lauren, on the other hand, wasn't handling things as gracefully. Word spread quickly, and soon enough she was reaching out, demanding that Ethan take down the message, accusing him of making her the villain. "It wasn't that serious," she texted. "You didn't have to tell everyone." Ethan stared at his phone, disbelief washing over him. Even now, after everything, she refused to take responsibility. "It was serious enough to end our marriage," he replied simply. She didn't respond after that. The days that followed were both liberating and strange. He woke up in an empty house, drank his morning coffee alone, and went through his routine without the weight of deception pressing down on him. At first he thought he would feel lost, unmoored by the sudden change, but instead he felt something else entirely. Relief. For months, maybe longer, he had been living in an illusion, unknowingly playing the part of a man in a happy marriage. Now the illusion was gone, and what remained was clarity. He no longer had to wonder where Lauren was on Saturday nights, no longer had to question the strange silences or the distant glances. He was free from the constant, gnawing suspicion that something was wrong. One evening he found himself at a bar downtown, not far from where Lauren's deception had unraveled. A friend had convinced him to come out, insisting that he needed to start living again. Ethan had resisted at first, but eventually he agreed. As he sat at the counter, nursing a whiskey, he realized something surprising. He wasn't angry anymore. The betrayal still stung, but the rage had faded, replaced by something calmer. Acceptance. Across the bar, laughter erupted from a group of friends, clinking glasses together. The sound reminded him of that night in the brewery, of Lauren and Mark toasting to their little secret. Ethan smiled to himself, shaking his head. She had thought her story was airtight, her alibi unbreakable. She had believed she was in control, that her lies would never spill over. But the truth had a way of rising to the surface, and Ethan had finally walked away, his dignity intact, leaving Lauren to drown in the mess she had made.